divorce, it's very problematic, because if you don't do it right, then the woman is not properly divorced, her children from another man will end up being mamzerim, bastards, and it's really very, very problematic, much worse than not eating kosher and so on. So even though Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel were in disagreement on various issues relating to marriage and divorce, Beit Shammai did not nevertheless abstain from marrying women of the families of Beit Hillel, nor did Beit Hillel refrain from marrying those of Beit Shammai. This is to teach that they showed love and friendship towards one another, thus putting into practice the scriptural text, therefore love, truth, and peace. So they were able to put aside their theoretical differences, and the practice of the son of somebody from Beit Shammai wanted to marry a daughter of somebody from Beit Hillel. They didn't say, no, because we don't agree on these very important issues, we will not allow it. They found a way to allow marriage between both groups, even though they had sometimes very important differences in the way they understood the sources. Okay. Now I want to go into two different subjects that I chose. They're very, very important subjects. And I wanted to say that when they talk about non-Jews, Gentiles in the Talmud, you should take into account that they're talking about idolaters. They're talking about people who not only worshipped idols, but very often also had completely unethical behaviors, especially in what relates to sexual mores, etc. And the other thing is that when they write about non-Jews and sometimes look for ways to separate from non-Jews, they're not doing that because they don't respect non-Jews, but because this is a way to keep the Jewish people together, to keep tradition alive, and to, especially if you're living in the diaspora, to avoid assimilation, which is a very clear danger when you live there in a population which is mostly non-Jewish. And it's interesting to note that yesterday I heard a Dvar Torah in our shul mentioning that Yitro, Moses' father-in-law, who was a priest, a Midianite priest, was the one who gave Moses advice about how to build a good judicial system, and Moses respected him and took his ideas, which shows you that we can have a very good and respectful relationship with non-Jews, even when we set limits to our relationship with them, especially when it comes to issues like marriage. So this is not this is like just something I wanted to say before I go into these examples, because the language of the Talmud sometimes sounds very, very strong. And I wanted to make sure you understand we're not talking about Muslims and Christians. We're talking about Roman idolaters of the time of the Talmud. So the first issue I wanted to talk about is the issue of conversion. So I'm going to put up the source. I first want to see what the questions are here. Okay. Oh, there's more questions here. Okay. So the first issue I'm picking is the issue of conversion. And there are two Talmudic sources that are really very, very different. And it's important for you to see them because they are at the background of all of the disagreements that come later on. I didn't pick the whole page. I just took parts of it, but because it's very long otherwise, but we'll read parts of it. So in the Babylonian Talmud, in the treatise of Yevamot, it says as following: our rabbis taught, if at the present time a man desires to convert, he is to be addressed as follows: what reason have you for desiring to convert? Do you not know that Israel at the present time are persecuted and oppressed, despised, harassed, and overcome by afflictions? If he replies, I know, and yet am unworthy, he is accepted forthwith and is given instruction in some of the light and some of the severe mitzvot. This is very important because it says some of them. The person who teaches them some of those that are more easy to observe and some of them that are more difficult. He calls them light and severe mitzvot. And the examples that they bring, he's informed of the neglect of the mitzvot of gleaning, forgotten sheep, the corn and the poor man tithe. All of these are laws that have to do with, in Israel, when you plant and when you have to collect your produce, or a corner, or if you have to give the poor people. These are parts of your produce that you don't keep for yourself, but you give to the poor. And it's very interesting that all of these examples are examples from the person's relationship with his neighbors or with other people, and it doesn't have to do with ritual things. Specifically, they talk about interpersonal relations, social issues. He is also told about the punishment for the transgression of mitzvot. Furthermore, he is addressed thus: be it known to you that before you came to this condition, that means before you converted, if you had eaten suet, which is a kind of animal fat, you would have not been punishable with karet, which is a very severe punishment from heaven. If you eat this part of the fat, which you should put on the altar, then you deserve this punishment. And if you had profaned the Sabbath, you would have been punishable with stoning. But now, you would not have been punishable with stoning. But now, once you have converted, were you to eat suet, you would be punished with karet. And were you to profane the Shabbat, you would be punished with stoning. So be careful. Be sure you really want to be a convert before you are liable to these punishments. And he is informed of that punishment for the transgression of the mitzvot. So he is also informed of the reward granted for their fulfillment. He is told, be it known to you that the world to come was made only for the righteous, and that Israel at the present time are unable to bear too much prosperity or too much suffering. He is not, however, to be persuaded or dissuaded too much. When you're not insisting too much, you tell him some of the mitzvot, some of the easy ones, some of the more difficult ones. You tell him what the punishments are and what the rewards are, but you don't insist too much. You give it to him in a general way. He'll have time later on to go on studying. We just give him some of it. And if he accepted, he is circumcised forthwith. That means after he is taught all of this, he is circumcised. As soon as he is healed, arrangements are made for his immediate ritual immersion, when two learned men must stand by his side and acquaint him with some of the light mitzvot and some of the severe ones. So after he studied, he was warned, and while he's being immersed in the mikvah, he's again warned. And when he comes out after his ritual immersion, he is deemed to be an Israelite in all respects. Later on in this source, which I didn't bring the whole one, it says that an example is, even if he later decides that he no longer wants to be Jewish, if he married a Jewish woman, the marriage is valid and he has to dissolve it by a get, even if he decides that he made a mistake, because there is no dissolving conversion. Once he's converted, it's forever, it's permanent. He's like any other Jew. He's an Israelite in all respects, says the Talmud. And in the case of a woman convert, women make her sit in the water up to her neck, while two learned men stand outside and give her instruction in some of the light mitzvot and some of the severe ones. So it's the same process. The only difference is, of course, women have no circumcision. So all we know from the Talmud, and this is very important, is that you have to teach a prospective convert. If it's a man, he has to do Brit Milah, the circumcision, and whether it's a man or a woman, they have to do the ritual immersion. These are the formal aspects of conversion. As far as teaching him the mitzvot, it doesn't even say what it means that the convert says, yes, I accept it. There are many, many interpretations in the different responsa about, or in the different sources about what this entails. The Shulchan Aruch, even the Maimonides and the Shulchan Aruch, right? You teach him some mitzvot and you do the circumcision and the ritual immersion, and none of them give a detailed explanation of what it means to accept the mitzvot. And later, decisors write that it can be as much as just saying, yes, I do, like a formal acceptance of mitzvot, until the other extreme, which we'll read an example of later on, where a rabbi of the 19th century said, if he doesn't accept even the most minor detail, we can't accept him as a convert, because the Talmud doesn't give a precise definition of what it means to accept the mitzvot. It just says you teach him some, and if he accepts, you do the Brit Milah and the ritual immersion, and that's it. And there is no definition of what it means to accept the mitzvot. And none of the sources until of the 19th century go beyond that. You teach him, you expect him to accept it, you do the Brit Milah, and you do the immersion. That's it. Okay? Any comment to this? Okay. So now I want to show you another Talmudic source. There is a very short source from the treatise of Bechorot, where it says the following: if a Gentile who comes to accept the entire Torah except for one thing, he says, yes, I accept everything, but for example, I still want to eat shellfish. We do not accept him. Rabbi Yosef Bar Yehuda says even a single detail of rabbinic law, so not only Torah law, but even a single detail of rabbinic law, Rabbi Yossi ben Yehuda says, we do not accept him as a convert. Now, the interesting thing is, if you look at a page of Talmud, I don't know if you all know what it looks like, but a Vilna edition of the Talmud has on one side, it sends you to Maimonides and to the Shulchan Aruch and a couple of other sources, so that you know what the final legal decision is, because as you know, as somebody just mentioned before, it doesn't say on the page, this is what we do, this is what we don't do. So you go to the codes and you see all through the codes, even in Maimonides and in the Joseph Scaro Shulchan Aruch, that nobody codified like this source Bechorot. There is no sign there that anybody codified like this. They all codified like the first source. It says you teach him and you do Brit Milah and you do the ritual immersion, and none of them codify that if he doesn't accept a detail or if he doesn't accept even a minor rabbinic detail, then he can't be converted. But of course, they didn't erase this, because there were some sages, some of the Amoraim, that accepted this opinion. So they don't erase it. They remind us that there were some people who had this opinion, but they were not taken into account for codifying the law regarding conversion. And these are two very different perspectives within the Talmud itself, what it means, whether it's just formally accepting the commandments and doing the Brit Milah for males and the ritual immersion for everyone, or does accepting the commandments really mean what the source in Bechorot says, that even if you question a minor detail, either of the Torah or even of the rabbinic law, you cannot be converted. Okay, you can tell that it's a very, very big difference.
Rabbi Diana?
What?
Rabbi, I have a question about this.
Yes.
I was just curious about my understanding of the interpretation in Israel today is that the Orthodoxy is very, very strict about people accepting the mitzvot. They doesn't seem like it's very ambiguous, that they're very, very exacting.
Okay, the problem is that we have a very ultra-Orthodox rabbinate. In old times, even the official Israeli rabbinate wasn't like that. There were rabbis, I'll mention one of them later on, like the Rav Uziel, who was the first Sephardi chief rabbi, and Rav Herzog, who was an Ashkenazi chief rabbi, and other rabbis who were much more open-minded. Some of them served in the army. Many of them had academic degrees. Today, most of the rabbis that sit on rabbinic courts, whether it's for divorce or for conversion, are ultra-Orthodox, very, very strict rabbis. And if you study the Talmud, you'll see in another source, which I didn't bring here because not directly relevant, which is Beit Satubi, where the rabbis say that it's preferable always to take the lenient opinion. And on that source, Rashi, who is the main commentator on the Talmud, says that everybody can be strict because it's the easiest thing to be strict. You can always say, oh, just in case this is forbidden and this is forbidden and everything is forbidden. You have to be really learned to be able to say, but here I find a way to be lenient. So that actually, if you can be lenient, you should be lenient. It's no great, you're not really super smart by being strict. But the truth is that most, not all, but most rabbinic courts in Israel are super strict. That doesn't mean that it's required. And I'm not talking only about compared to conservative decisors. Even among the classical decisors and the Orthodox ones in the last 200 years, you'll find more lenient opinions. Okay, so I'm going to go into some of the responsa to show you the different opinions, because the idea was to show you how, based exactly on the same rabbinic sources, but taking into consideration the time and place we live in and the circumstances we live in, we don't always have to be deciding in the exact same way. And it's obvious that 20th or 21st century Israel, where we live in our own country, in our own sovereign country, can't be compared to, I don't know, the 3rd or 4th or 5th century in the time of the Romans, when they were when they were much more careful about, preventing that you should be in touch with these idolaters that were surrounding you. Okay. So the first one that I'm bringing to you is one of the rabbis from the end of the 19th century. Rabbi Yitzchak Shmelkes was from Przemyśl. I think at the time it was Lithuania. And when I want to tell you the exact years, so you know where it was. He lived, wait a minute. He was born in 1827 in Galicia, in today's Poland, but I think at the time it was Lithuania, and he passed away in 1905. And one of the things we have to take into account is that this is the time when reform is developing. And some of the things that Orthodox rabbis wrote at the time is also a reaction to reform and a way to try and protect the Jewish community. So it's not necessarily because they were just decided to be strict, but the circumstances took them to be strict. So since these sources don't exist in English for the most, I took the main part and translated it into English, but it's a longer responsa. So in his responsa, Beit Yitzchak, he wrote the following: if a convert took upon himself to observe all the mitzvot, and in his heart he did not mean it, that means that he wasn't really serious. He said, oh, yes, I'll observe everything, but he's saying it in a way so that you would convert him, but not because he's really convinced. His conversion is invalid, as it says in Bechorot 30, and he quotes what we just studied. A Gentile who comes to accept the entire Torah except for one thing, we do not accept it. And Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda says even a single detail of rabbinic law, as it says in Bechorot. And remember that what it says in Bechorot is not codified in any of the major codes of Jewish law. But Rabbi Shmelke says, hence, those converts who, due to our many sins, are converted in Ashkenazi countries, that is, rabbis who convert non-Jews are doing this. Unfortunately, they are doing this in Ashkenazi country, knowing that they will not observe the laws afterwards. These people who maybe want to marry a Jew and say, okay, I'll convert so that we can have a chuppah, have no intention of being observant. And the rabbis understand that they probably won't be strictly observant, and that they intend to have relations with menstruate women, which is completely forbidden by Jewish law, or to profane the Shabbat and to eat non-kosher food, are not valid converts. This is what Rabbi Shmelkes is the first one to write with such an extreme position. He has a Talmudic support, but that's a source that was not used for codification, and probably because of the development of Reform Judaism, where they were not strict, they were not committed to the observance of the Jewish law, they felt they had to be extra strict with the observance of Jewish law. And therefore they said, if I know that this prospective convert is not going to be observant, not only in the general, but if he's not going to be strictly observant, I should not convert them to begin with. That's the opinion that's the first rabbi who wrote such a very, very, very strict opinion at the end of the 19th century. Any comments? Okay. Oh, wait a minute.
Actually, I have a comment.
Okay. So I'm going on to
I
Rabbi.
just wanted to ask a question.
Sure.
This is jumping ahead a little bit. I believe Tzvi Zohar wrote a book about conversion.
I know the book. The book brings you different opinions from medieval times to modern times, and shows you that there is a wide range of opinions as far as what is considered accepting mitzvot. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, that one.
He wrote it in Hebrew, and then he wrote an expanded version in English.
Did it make any impact?
I don't know, but it's convenient because he put together many, many of the different opinions throughout the ages. And you see, I'm just bringing you here very few examples, but there are a lot more examples of rabbis going either way. You know, if you look either in the direction of you teach them and you do the rituals that you're supposed to do, and that's your responsibility as a rabbi who's teaching conversion and as a Beit Din who's accepting a convert. And then you have the other extreme, which is what Ruth was mentioning about what usually happens in Batei Din in Israel, which is, you know, being super strict and being sure that this person is going to observe orthodoxly with all the details, and very often rejecting the person and making them come back 2 and 3 times to the rabbinic court.
I have a question.
Sure.
Is it assumed that going back biblically to the Yetziat Mitzrayim, that all the males Israelites were circumcised?
Yes, but you can't do that, because all of first of all, we are rabbinic Judaism, so you can't go just by written law. Very often the rabbis interpreted the literal text in a completely different way, and as rabbinic Judaism, we understand the Torah as the rabbis explained it. And conversion as we know it today did not exist in biblical times. If you remember, the patriarchs and Moses, they all married non-Jews, and the women just joined the Jewish people, and they became a part of the Jewish people. I'll bring you other sources later on. It's just in the time of Ezra and Nehemiah that they clearly said, we can't do this anymore. You have to separate from your non-Jewish wives. And they decided that Judaism goes by maternal line, even if you're being Cohen Levi, or Israel goes by paternal line. And so ever since, like over 2,000 years already, Judaism goes by maternal line. Of course, at the time, there was no DNA, so there was no way to prove who the father was. The mother was always clearly known. So we've kept ever since the definition that Judaism is defined by a maternal line, and not by, you can't go by the biblical written text with, and besides, the conversion as we know it today is rabbinic. It's not is not biblical. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to Rabbi Kook. You probably all heard of Rabbi Kook, Rabbi Israel Avraham Yitzchak Cohen Kook. He was the first Ashkenazi chief rabbi, but before the creation of the state. And he was consulted by Rabbi Seton, who was a chief Sephardi rabbi in Argentina. There was a very unique situation in Argentina because they brought women from, Jewish men brought women from Europe that they converted and married, but the purpose of bringing them to Argentina was to use them as prostitutes. And so there is a cemetery in Buenos Aires, which is where all these women are buried in a separate cemetery, and it was a very particular situation. So maybe that's part of the reason the rabbi asked this question, and part of the reason that the Rav Kook answered in such an extreme way. And because of this responsum of the Rav Kook, up to today, Orthodox rabbis do not convert in Argentina. They may teach a prospective convert, but they always send them to a Beit Din in Israel or in the United States. Up to this day, nobody does the conversion itself in Argentina. Now, Rabbi Kook was in Jerusalem in 1928, and this Rabbi Seton, a Sephardi rabbi, writes him a question about all of these women who are being asked to convert, and that he knows they're not going to be observant, etc. And what should he do about it? Again, it's a long responsa. It does not exist in English, so I translated the main sections. The sages said explicitly, and again we go back to the same source in Bechorot 30b, that a Gentile who comes to accept the entire Torah except for one thing, we do not accept them. So how can we accept a convert who we know will transgress biblical law? And he says, it is surprising that the decisors excluded this law, yet it remains valid. This is unbelievable what Rav Kook wrote, because it says in Bechorot that if he questions even a small detail, you don't accept it. But if you look, you'll see that none of the codes codified according to this law. And yet, Rav Kook, how come the decisors excluded it? It remains valid, he says. We should really follow this law, even though none of the main codes of law codified in this fashion, okay? And he adds another thing. In fact, by accepting a convert who is not going to be observant, we transgress the prohibition of placing a stumbling block before the blind. This is based on a verse in Parashat Kedoshim, Leviticus, where it says, do not place a stumbling block before the blind. And it's not only literally, you can't put a block, but if you don't explain to somebody that there's certain problems with what he's about to do, it's like placing a stumbling block before the blind. So if I don't explain, says Rav Kook, to a prospective convert that now he has to observe all kinds of laws, and if not, he's going to be transgressing, then I am actually making him transgress. I'm putting a stumbling block before the blind. So therefore, he says, if they are really converts and are obligated after the fact to observe the whole Torah, because once I converted him, he has to observe, they will be liable for Torah punishments. How can I do that? So I better not accept him as a convert to begin with, if I'm not going to be teaching him everything and requiring him to observe everything from the start. Because in the end, I'm not only that I'm accepting somebody who's not going to be observant, but I'm making this person be liable for punishments because he is not really doing what he's supposed to do when he accepts to become a convert. Okay, and this is like almost 100 years since he wrote it. It's still being applied by Orthodox Batei Din in Argentina. And now a completely different opinion. Rabbi Ben Zion Meir Chai Uziel was the first Sephardi chief rabbi after the state was founded. And he was approached by a rabbi who received people coming from Arab countries. There were cases where they came married to a woman who was Muslim and had children, and they came to Israel, and now they wanted, this man wanted the wife and children to become Jewish because they're living in the Jewish state. But this Muslim woman will do it to make him happy, and so he can have a chuppah and the kids can be considered Jewish, but there is no expectation that she's suddenly going to be observing everything. So the rabbi writes Rabbi Uziel and says, what am I going to do? This man comes to me, he's married to a woman who's Muslim, the kids are Muslim. What am I going to do? How am I going to convert her? She's not really going to be converted. She's not really going to be observant. So Rabbi Uziel responds in this fashion. If someone wants to convert, he is taught the principles of faith, which are there is only one God, and that it is forbidden to practice idolatry, expanding on these themes. If you remember, the source in Yebamot doesn't even talk about principles of faith. It only talks about more lenient and more severe kinds of commandments. But Maimonides, when he wrote his codification, said that a main issue was that he should know there is only one God and you can't observe other religions. And that's why up to this day, at a conversion Beit Din, a court of law, a person is usually asked if they still believe in Jesus or if they still believe in their old religion, because and he says even to expand, Maimonides already wrote, and these issues we talk about a lot about this. We tell them that we have only one God and you can't be observing another religion or believing in other gods, etc. And this you expand. However, regarding acceptance of mitzvot, he is informed about some of the light and some of the severe mitzvot or commandment, and about the punishment for the transgression of the mitzvot, like we saw in the first source in the Talmud. From here, it explicitly follows that we do not require of him to observe the mitzvot, and the court need not even know that he will observe them. That is, the rabbis teach him the law, explains to him what he's supposed to do, and hopes that he will observe, but he does not require him from the start to commit to observing all the mitzvot. For were this not true, converts would never be accepted. For who can guarantee that this non-Jews will be faithful to all the mitzvot of the Torah? How can I expect someone who grew up completely different, who's studying maybe for a year, who's getting close to Judaism, to suddenly turn around and observe absolutely everything? I'm not being rational if I think that it's possible that from one day to the next, this person will observe everything. So what does Rabbi Uziel say? We inform him about some of the mitzvot, so that he may abandon the conversion if he so desires. That's I want for him to know that there are mitzvot, and that if he doesn't do them, he's liable for punishment. And if he feels it's too much, he can decide he's not completing the process, and so that he's not able to say later that had he known, he would never have been converted. This is lechatchila. That means from the start, when I'm teaching this prospective convert, I teach him the mitzvot and I tell them that he's liable for punishment if he doesn't observe it. But b'diavad, that means after the fact, if he has converted and he doesn't know all of this, the failure to inform him does not invalidate the conversion. We learn from all that has been stated that accepting the observance of the mitzvot is not an indispensable requirement for conversion, even lechatchila, even from the start. From the very beginning, I teach this person, and I hope they will accept it, and I hope they will observe. But at no point do I tell him, you have to accept everything, otherwise I won't convert you. In the end, they will observe the mitzvot. My hope is that in the end, they will observe the mitzvot. And we must open a door for them. And if they do not observe, they will be sinners and we will be blameless. It's their responsibility. The responsibility of those who teach them and those who are sitting on the conversion court is to teach them and do the milah and the tefillah and hope that they will observe. But once they've converted, it's their responsibility, and the court can't be checking up on them and looking into see what they observe or they don't observe. In our generation, he wrote this in 1951. I mean, it's right after the state was created. So I think probably it's even worse today. In our generation, it's very tough to lock the door for converts because it opens wide gates and pushes men and women in Israel to convert to other faiths and abandon the Jewish people or to assimilate among Gentiles. This is even worse outside of Israel. The Jews are surrounded by non-Jews. So it's very easy to abandon your own faith and to assimilate among Gentiles. So that if we are not helpful in converting those who are maybe from mixed families or the children from mixed families and so on, then we're just making things even more difficult. As for the children of an assimilated Jew, we must draw them near to us, whether they are children of a Jewish or a Gentile woman, because they are seeds of Israel. It's called in Hebrew, Zera Israel, descendants of a Jew. So we have a responsibility for Jews who might assimilate, and we have a responsibility for children of mixed marriages, and we have to teach them, and we have to try and bring them closer to Judaism. And if they need to be converted, we can do circumcision and ritual immersion, and we teach them, but we don't have to require from the start that they observe every little detail, because that's not what the source is, except for that Bechorot source that wasn't used as a basis for codification requires. Comments?
Yeah, it seems to me almost impossible to assure that a convert will observe every mitzvah. Even Jews, natural-born Jews, don't. So you would have to watch them every minute of the day to see that they observe all the mitzvot. It seems very unrealistic.
Yeah, that's true. It's you have it sometimes, but it's difficult. It's very difficult. Sometimes the Batei Din are so strict that it's unbelievable. I've heard things in the official rabbinic courts here, like they asked the woman, say Ashrei by heart. You don't know it? Oh, then you can't be a convert. And I say to myself, that's ridiculous. The only reason I know Ashrei by heart is because I've been saying it since I was a little girl. Whoever sat down to study Ashrei by heart. Or in another case, they ask, well, say the blessing after the meals by heart. And the woman said, I don't know. Oh, then you can't be a convert. It's no requirement to know those things by heart. It's difficult enough for a convert to try to learn in a year or so the basic issues of Judaism and become part of the congregation than to start requiring that they know everything by heart. That's not a requirement. But the Batei Din in Israel are very often very, very strict.
I'd like to ask, what do you think that Rabbi Uziel meant by bring close the children?
Oh, because he's talking about assimilated Jews who are in the community, but they're not really part of the Jewish community, and you want to teach them and bring them close, and maybe they marry a non-Jewish woman and you want to convert the wife and the children, try to be open to them.
would that mean converting the wife and the children more or less automatically?
He says very clearly, if they're children of a Jewish man, they're descendants of a Jew. They're what's called Zera Israel. They're
Mhm,
seeds of
mhm.
Israel. So he says we need to bring them back into the fold. We need to convert them. We can't say if they're not going to observe every detail, we won't convert them.
What was this opinion? I don't think this opinion was very
No, they
widely
used to be
accepted.
much more, the rabbis used to be much more open. The rabbis
Mhm.
from the first few years of the state were
Mhm.
much more open than today. They had rabbis like Rabbi Herzog, who was had a doctorate, and Rabbi Uziel, who's the one we just read, and Rabbi Goren, who found a way out when there were two children who were declared mamzerim, bastards, and couldn't get married, and he found a way out. There were rabbis who knew how to find the lenient solutions. Unfortunately, during the last few years, the rabbinic courts of law are usually more and more strict. But it's not necessary, even from the regular sources, forget conservative or reform, even from the all of the codes and from the responsa, you can find much more open ways to interpret the sources.
So why do you think that it became so strict and
I think in the
severe?
time of Rabbi Shmelkes, who was the first one who was so strict, it probably has a lot to do with the development of reform. Reform very clearly does not require the observance of Jewish law, and it's much easier to assimilate when you only have like a theoretical Jewish identification. It's very hard to, when you have, we're not living among idolaters like in the Roman times. We're living among Christians and Muslims that are believe in one God and are ethical just as much as we are. So if we don't have our own identity, which is developed through observing Jewish law and Jewish ritual, it's very, very easy to assimilate. The proof is in the pudding if you look at all the countries abroad.
But even in Israel, like, you think that
In Israel,
affected-
we are having a problem today also because we have over 500,000 Jews who came
Russian.
from the ex-Soviet Union and their descendants who are not halachically Jewish. And they're getting married with secular Jews with no conversion. So it's maybe not as bad as abroad, but we're having that problem as well.
You would think they would want to solve it instead of making it harder.
What?
You would think they would want to find a solution instead of making it impossible.
What happened is when the Jews from the former Soviet Union started coming, they probably would have converted. If the rabbinate had told them, okay, we'll do circumcision and immersion and you'll study a bit and then we'll convert you, probably most of them would have converted, but they required so many details that many of them never bothered to convert. Then their children are already a second or third generation that grew up in Israel, speak Hebrew, are part of the Jewish society. They're not part of the Muslim or Arab society. And they feel Jewish, even if they're not halachically Jewish. And they're absolutely not interested in conversion. We have a program for converting within the army. Some 2,000 or 3,000 maybe do this every year, but there's so many more that don't do it that I think it's a lost battle. It's impossible today to get all of these that are not halachically Jewish to convert. And many secular Jews don't care. They just go abroad, they get married by civil law. That way they can register it in the Minister of Interior, and they don't bother to convert anymore. So it's not only a problem. I think it's worse in the diaspora, but it's not only a problem in the diaspora anymore. Chupot, somebody asked me, Chupot is a not official Orthodox conversion. It's by Itin, and their conversions are not recognized officially either. They can register as Jews based on Chupot conversion, and they are not recognized by the rabbinate. There are many rabbis abroad who do conversions who the rabbinate doesn't recognize, even if they're Orthodox. Trump's daughter converted through Rabbi Lukstein, and the rabbinate here doesn't recognize Rabbi Lukstein. So
Rabbi Dana, can I just tell you that we twice accompanied converts during through the army program. And when we went the second time with the second convert, they knew we'd done it before. And the very first question they asked us in the Beit Din, my husband and I in the Beit Din, was, is your first convert still observant? It's the first thing they wanted to know. And luckily I was able truthfully to say I didn't know.
Do you have an Orthodox home?
Yes.
Ah, well, I don't know. My sister also has been a family that had army converts or different kind of Orthodox converts used to come to them for Shabbat and Chagim, and most of them are not observant in the end, even if you are Orthodox. You can't expect them to really be observant. It's very difficult.
Yeah, but our two were both Zer Yehudi. They're both daughters of Jewish fathers.
Yeah, that's what's called Zera Israel. Yeah. If they're daughters of a Jewish father or of a grandfather on the wrong side or a grandmother on the wrong side, not the mother's mother. Yeah. So that allows you to become a Jewish citizen, an Israeli citizen by the law of return, but that the rabbinate does not recognize that as Jewish. Okay. So the other issue, I don't know how far we'll get with it, but we'll start. The other subject, which is really very important, also especially abroad right now, is the issue of intermarriage that we touched upon a little bit before. There are a few verses that teach us what the Torah thinks about this, that especially in the book of Deuteronomy, where it says, you shall not intermarry with them, do not give your daughters to their sons or take their daughters for your sons, for he shall sway your son away from following me to worship other gods, and God's anger will blaze forth against you, promptly wiping you out. This is in the context of the 7 nations that lived in the land of Canaan, as it was called at the time, where you were completely forbidden to intermarry with them because they were all idol worshippers, obviously. And in the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, they also talk about this. And Ezra said, now then, do not give your daughters in marriage to their sons or let their daughters marry your sons. And Nehemiah also writes, we will not give our daughters in marriage to the peoples of the land or take their daughters for our sons. Therefore, those that were at that time still married to non-Jews were forced to separate. And we're talking about, I think, the 2nd or 3rd century BCE. So this is the way it's been for over 2,000 years. Also in another place in the book of Nehemiah, I adjure them by saying, you shall not give your daughters in marriage to their sons or take any of their daughters for your sons or yourselves. And the Talmud in Kiddushin explains to us regarding, I mentioned it briefly before, when we consider somebody Jewish or not. How do we know whether Kiddushin, which is the betrothal, the part of the marriage where the man says to the woman, you are betrothed to me, when he puts the ring on? How do we know if what do we know about it regarding a Gentile woman? Scripture says, the verse we just read, you shall not intermarry with them. How do we know that her issue bears her status? Rabbi Yochanan said on the authority of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, because scripture says, for he shall sway your son away from following me. Your son by an Israelite woman is called thy son, but your son by a Gentile is not called your son. Rabina said, this proves that your daughter's son by a Gentile is called your son. Now that verse refers to the 7 nations. From where do we learn about other nations? Scripture says, for your son will be turned away, which includes all who may turn him away. Then this section of the Talmud goes on. Not everybody accepts this interpretation, but based on other verses, they all consider that even if biblically they were talking about the 7 nations, rabbinically, for sure you can't marry any non-Jew, even if he does not belong to the 7 nations. Now, in the Talmud and Avodah Zarah, they explain to us how this rabbinic law developed. And they tell us that Bali declared that Abimid and Abatian said in the name of Rav, the bread, the wine, and the oil of the heathens and their daughters are all included in the 18 things. 18 things are 18 decrees that were decided by the school of Shammai when they were the majority, and one of them was that that you couldn't marry non-Jewish women. We have learned a court is unable to annul the decision of another court unless it is superior in wisdom and numerical strength. Furthermore, Rabbi Bar Chana said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, in all matters, a court can annul the decisions of another court, except the 18 decrees, those prohibited by the schools of Hillel and Shammai. For even were Elijah the prophet and his court to come and declare them permitted, we must listen to him. Rabbi Mesharsha said the reason that these 18 decrees form an exception is because their prohibition is spread among the large majority of the Israelites. And one of the rules is that if the majority are observing it, it makes it more difficult to annul it. If it hasn't been accepted by the majority, it is easier to annul it. The above text states, behold, Bali declared that Abimi the Damatian said in the name of Rab, the bread, the wine, and the oil of heathens, and their daughters are all included in the 18 things, but the prohibition against marrying their daughters is the biblical ordinance, for it is written, you shall not intermarry with them. The biblical ordinance is restricted to the 7 nations of Canaan. It does not include other heathen people, and the schools of Hillel and Shammai came and decreed against these also. So we have 2 different sources that say very clearly that even for those who think that the original biblical prohibition is only the 7 nations which don't exist anymore, we have already a very ancient decree that the majority of the Jews accepted for already around 2,000 years, where the children of a non-Jewish woman, even if she does not belong to the 7 original nations of Canaan, is forbidden. You can't marry her, and if you do, if you have children with her, the children are considered non-Jews. Okay, so now I wanted to show you how Maimonides codifies based on these laws and how far he takes it in his code of law when he tries to say when is somebody considered Jewish or non-Jewish. Wait a minute, something happened here and I can't lower it. Oh, okay. In the laws of marriage, he says, when a man consecrates a gentle woman or a Canaanite maidservant, the kiddushin are of no consequence, even if he does the traditional blessings in kiddushin and betrothal with a ring and everything else, it is not valid. The woman's status is the same after receiving the kiddushin as beforehand. So a Gentile woman who has not converted, even if a man does the whole ritual that he would do with a Jewish woman, it is invalid and he's still not considered married. Okay, that's one of the clear issues that he writes. Then he writes a series of laws, he codifies in his laws of forbidden marriage. When a Jew engages in relations with a woman from other nations, taking her as his spouse, or a Jewess engages in relations with a non-Jew as her spouse, they are punished by lashes, according to scriptural law. As Deuteronomy says, you shall not intermarry them, do not give your daughters to their sons, or take their daughters for your son. This provision applies equally to individuals from the 7 Canaanite nations and all other Gentiles. This was explicitly stated in Ezra, and we already read the verses in Ezra, where it says, we will not give our daughters in marriage to the peoples of the land or take their daughters to their sons. So he codifies, this is, as we said, we are Rabbinic Judaism. We interpret even biblical laws as the rabbis understood it, and we follow rabbinic law, and the rabbis decided over 2,000 years ago that a marriage to a non-Jew is not valid, and the children of a non-Jewish woman are not Jewish. And this doesn't apply only to the 7 nations of the time of the Talmud, but it applies to all of the Gentiles today. Now, he said if someone does have relations with a woman in a committed way, not only just a random time, He deserves lashes
Shivi
according
group
to
came
rabbinic
in
law.
head.
So Diana, the next session is in 4 minutes,
Please
so
close your volume. Close
Diana,
your volume. Okay.
the next
The
session
sec-
is 4 minutes, so you're supposed,
מיכל,
Diana, you're supposed to
אפשר
end.
לסגור את הווליום, אנחנו שומעים את הכל.
לא, אבל אני אומרת שאת צריכה לסיים את השיעור.
בסדר, okay. The second one is the scriptural prohibition applies only to marital relations. It goes, when by contrast, one engaged in relations with a Gentile woman with the licentious intent, he is given stripes for rebellious conduct according to rabbinic law. This is a decree, lest this lead to marriage. And the last law he writes about is if the zealot did not strike him, because there's also a law in the Torah that if you see it at the time that he's doing it, you can hit him. Nor he received stripes from the court. His punishment is explicitly stated in the words of a prophetic tradition. He is liable for karet, which is death from heaven, as it states in the book of Malachi. Judah desecrate that which is sacred by God, loving and engaging in relations with the daughter of a foreign god. And the last thing that Maimonides says is also, although this transgression is not punishable by execution by the court, it's a punishment from heaven, it should not be regarded lightly, for it leads to a detriment that has no parallel among all other forbidden sexual relations. For a child conceived from any other forbidden sexual union is a father's son with regard to all matters and considered a member of the Jewish people, even if he is a mamzer, which is a bastard according to Jewish law. A son conceived by a Gentile woman by contract is not considered his son. And he says that this matter causes one to cling to the Gentile nations from whom the Holy One, blessed be he, has separated us, and to turn away from following God and to betray him. So it's very, very dangerous to marry a non-Jewish woman and have non-Jewish children, because this will separate us from other Jews and from tradition and our children, and we will assimilate among the non-Jews. And therefore it's much more dangerous than just having other prohibited sexual relations. So we see that it's considered one of the main issues in observing Jewish law is to be careful about whom we marry, and that our children remain within the fold. Any other comments? Because we have to close in a couple of minutes.
You said it's not clear how to get back.
What?
It's not clear how to get back to the joint session.
You need to close
Oh,
it.
no, you don't
You
get back to
stay
the Zoom
here.
session. You have to go to your next
Go
class.
to your email.
You stay
Go to
here.
your email and you go into your next class. Only after the second when you go back to the main session.
Okay.
Thank you very much. It was
Yes,
very
it was.
interesting.
Bye. See you.
Yeshakah.
Thank you. Bye.
No, don't leave, people.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Not a problem.
Ruth, I sent you a message. In the
I
other
hope
room.
I'm on the second session now.
Yep.
Stay with us. We'll be in the second session together.
Thank you, Geraldine.
It's good to see
Always
you,
a pleasure
Margaret.
to see you.
Indeed.
And make sure you come to the last session, okay? So you
Yeah,
can
of course.
re-speak.
Looking forward to it, Rabbi.
I always like seeing you, Rabbi.
Thank you. I'm exhausted, I have to tell you all though.
You look very
Yeah.
tired.
I'm
When did
really
you get
tired.
in?
I got in on Friday morning, and this morning you'll hear in my remarks. I went down. What am I talking about? I went down to near Kibbutz Be'eri, and we made sandwiches. But we left the house at 7:15 in the morning, so I'm just a little.
That's
tired.
why you have that arm to keep your head.
Yeah.
What's the rest of our excuses? My head's always like this. I watch, listen to message, listen to me.
But I don't know if there's anyone from Ashkelon here. It's my new favorite community. So it's beautiful there.
My whole family. Oh,
Yes,
most of my
Rabbi,
family
I'm
is
from
not-
Ashkelon and I saw
Shana, I
you,
think you can start.
I saw you at services on
We're
Saturday.
supposed to start at 6:25. I think
Can you hear me? All right, so I will get started. Is there an echo? All right.
no, and I made you the co-host, of course.
Great. I am, if there's any problem with my internet connection, just hold on for about 45 seconds and I'll come in with my phone. So, and also I apologize for my voice. So, hello everyone joining from near and far. I'm in Israel. I'm Dr. Shana Rosenblatt Maurer. I'm a lecturer at the Schechter Institute. And I am happy to see you all here today. I've spoken a few times at the Women's Study Day, and it's always been a great experience. So I'm really happy for us all to be together.
You can skip songs. Remember that. But you have to watch.
Diane wrote to me, and she said that we're tired of themes of pulling ourselves together, resilience, coping, muddling through. We want to do something a little bit more positive. How about harmony, unity, moving forward? So I said, but I do literature. Literature is always bumpy and thorny and full of conundrum and questions and paradox. But I came with the idea and she said, terrific, that sounds perfect. So what we're going to talk about today is Isaac Bashevis Singer's story, Gimple the Fool. And I framed it as Gimple the Fool, fool or Rodef Shalom, a seeker of peace. So that is where we're going to start today. Before we jump in, I'm just going to ask everybody, and I don't see everybody on my screen at once, so I apologize. Maybe jump in or use the hand up icon. Any thoughts, comments, any familiarity with this story, Gimple the Fool or Isaac Bashevis Singer in general, that you might want to share? Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start off with a little bit of background. So we have this story, and in English, in Hebrew, it was written originally in Yiddish by the Nobel Prize winning author, Isaac Bashevis Singer, probably the best known Yiddish author to ever write. And he writes a story. It's called Gimple Tam. And Hebrew, Tam has all sorts of nuance to it. It's not just fool. And we'll talk about that. And Gimple Tam goes on to be a real landmark story. So, he first writes a story in 1945, and it's an interesting time to write a story because it's just on the cusp of the end of the Holocaust. And it's a story that takes place in Europe, and it's about a Jewish community that's very insular. We don't have any non-Jews in the story. We only have Jews, which is very interesting because the question arises whether it is an allegory for something else, because obviously it's a little bit fictitious. Jews lived in a non-Jewish world in Europe. Nevertheless, we have this story, and it's only translated in 1953. By 1953, Irving Greenberg, the Yiddish scholar Irving Greenberg, together I think with Irving Howe, they get their hands on the story and they decide they want to publish it in Partisan Review. And they asked Saul Bellow, the novelist Saul Bellow, to translate it. Saul Bellow was fluent in Yiddish. And what they did is they sat down, Saul Bellow was at the computer, and they read it aloud in Yiddish. And as they read, Saul Bellow translated. And I'll just add a parenthetical note because I think it's interesting. Isaac Bashevis Singer was not so happy about this situation. The story was an instant success. It was a real phenomenon. It got a lot of coverage immediately, but there was this question. Was a story in Yiddish as excellent as a story in English, or did it have the Bellovian flair? Did Saul Bellow elevate it? And Isaac Bashevis Singer was so insulted by the idea that his work was somehow improved by Saul Bellow. He had never allowed Bellow or any other famous novelist to translate his work. Again, he always worked with a bevy of anonymous, unknown translators, most of them young American women who had grown up in Yiddish-speaking homes. Just a little parenthetical information. So here's the plot of the story in broad strokes. We have this character, Gimple. He grows up in the town of Frampol. It's not located, but we imagine it's, as Rabbi Dan was talking about, it's a Galicianer town, a town in Poland. And Bashevis Singer himself was from Poland, the Warsaw area. And Gimple is an orphan who is mercilessly ridiculed, mocked, and taken advantage of by the townspeople. They're always tricking him. They're always playing games at him. They're always laughing at him. And then the town gets together and decides that they should marry off Gimple. And they marry him off to Elka. Elka is sort of the town whore. She's promiscuous. She's had all sorts of children out of wedlock, and they decide this is perfect. We can sort of take care of Elka and Gimple in one fell swoop, and they marry Gimple off to Elka. He has a sense that he is being married off to this tramp of a woman, but he goes along with it. Eventually, Elka comes to Gimple in a dream and confesses all of her misdeeds and all of the ways that she has deceived Gimple. And Gimple decides that he is going to seek revenge on the town. He is a baker. He has a successful bakery. He's going to urinate in the town's bread one day. And he does so, and he's prompted on by a dream with the Satan, the evil spirit, who tells him to do this, tells him to get his comeuppance. But in the end, he decides, no, I don't want to be that kind of person. He throws the bread out, and then he decides to leave Frampol. Elka has passed away. His children are older, and he goes out to tell his story to the world. And those, in broad strokes, are the main tenets of the story. Just a very quick overview. So, any questions about the story, about Gimple? This name, Gimple, seems to be a creation of Isaac Bashevis Singer, but the Tom part is something that he kind of commits to with all the weight that that word Tom connotes. It's a very weighted word in English and in Yiddish. I apologize, I'm not looking at the chat regularly. I'll check into the chat periodically, but I'm not going to keep it open the whole time. So let's talk about this word Tom. Where do we have Tom?
In the Haggadah. In the Haggadah.
In the Haggadah, right? The third son, right? We call him in English the simple son, but he's the Tom. He's the one who's Tom. And Tom there is simple. Traditionally translated as simple. Sort of naive, simple, straightforward, literal. That's often how the Haggadah sort of interprets Tom. Not always, but often.
Any relationship to the word Tom that's used as a good taste? Or
so that's a good question. It's actually quite a different spelling. Gimple Tom is Taf Mem Sofit. Tom taste is Tet Ayin Mem Sofit. So probably not. Yaakov Avinu. Yaakov Avinu is called Ish Tam. Why? In that sense, Tom is good. He is innocent. He's got a good moral character. He's pure. And that's the way it's intended with Yaakov. But there is a part of Yaakov that is possibly duped, right? He's fooled by Lavan. What does Lavan do to Yaakov? How does he dupe him?
Marries him to Leah before Rachel.
Right. And then so we have the question of, was Yaakov really duped? Did Yaakov possibly understand the righteousness of the decision that the older had to be married? He says he's surprised, and he goes back to Lavan and says, "You have to give me Rachel." But there's a suggestion that how naive was Yaakov? But nevertheless, this idea that he was Tom, that he went along with a ruse, whether he had any idea or not. We also get the sense that Gimel and Yaakov are also in a similar category, but both of them are inclined to take the high road. When Yaakov is going to meet Esav, right, and he's going to have this meeting after many years, and they've been apart, and ostensibly he's stolen his birthright. Yaakov, he's going to take the high road. He's going to meet him with gifts. Some people say, "Oh, well, he was terrified. I mean, Esav was possibly going to kill him," but he doesn't come for war. He comes hoping for the best, doing the best that he can to create some kind of harmonious reconciliation. Another Ishtam is Eov. And Eov is our sufferer par excellence, but a sufferer who proves himself worthy and is able to overcome. So when we have Isaac Bashevis Singer choosing this name, Gimel Tam, it's not a name that has sort of a monotone resonance. It's a name with a lot of variation. It's a name that has a lot of layers, and he chooses it very deliberately. Isaac Bashevis Singer was highly schooled in biblical texts. He had a intensive yeshiva education pretty much from the time he was literate, which would probably be about 3 or 4 years old, until he was 18 years old. He was deeply entrenched in a yeshiva world, and his Jewish knowledge would have been, extremely profound. So let's look at the text and see what Gimel himself says. And I think that it's always best to go to the text and let's see what the characters say. And we'll see what we think of Gimel. So I'm going to put up this text. Just shout out, is there anyone who's a willing reader of the text? It's just a regular text of a paragraph. Any brave people?
You have it on the screen? Am I missing something?
I'm gonna put it up on the screen.
Oh.
Yeah, so Kaufman there, I don't see Rebecca Kaufman. I'm gonna put this up on the screen, and I'd love you to read it out for us. Okay, so here it's passage 1, where it says, "I am Gimel the fool." If you could just read that.
Okay, I don't have my teeth in, so I'll do the best I can. Okay, I am Gimel the fool. I don't think myself a fool. On the contrary, but that's what folks call me. They gave me the name while I was still in school. I had 7 names in all: imbecile, donkey, flaxhead, dope, grump, ninny, and fool. The last name stuck. What did my foolishness consist of? I was easy to take in. They said, "Gimel, you know the rabbi's wife has been brought to childbed?" So I skipped school. Well, it turned out to be a lie. How was I supposed to know? She hadn't had a big belly, but I never looked at her belly. Was that so foolish? The gang laughed and hee-hawed, stomped and danced and chanted a goodnight prayer. And instead of the raisins they give when a woman's lying in, they stuffed my handful of goat turds. I was no weakling. If I slapped someone, he'd see all the way to Krakow. But I'm really not a sluggard by nature. I think to myself, let it pass. So they take advantage of me.
Great, thank you very much. I want to suggest here that we see glimmers here of a Gimel who is choosing harmony. If we go back to our theme, is Gimel a fool or Rodef Shalom? Does anyone see where Gimple's making a choice here?
Sure. He says that he could slap people, but he chooses not to.
Exactly. He chooses to avoid violence. That's a choice. And he is not sort of bullied into this position of subservience. He chooses it. And that's a kind of strength I want to suggest.
I think he also chooses to believe people.
He chooses to believe them. He chooses to, even though he knows that people are not always kind and honest and decent, but he chooses to. And then I just want to draw your attention here to this line. How was I supposed to know? Talking about the rabbi's wife. She hadn't had a big belly, but I never looked at her belly. Was that really so foolish? Now we think of a Jewish boy. He's being taught in yeshiva. He's having a Jewish education. He didn't look at the Rebbetzin. Is that good or bad? He didn't look at her belly.
It's good.
It's good. He showed a certain kind of modesty. So what we have here is Gimple, on the one hand, being the scapegoat, being the target, the victim. On the other hand, you can only be a target and a victim within limits if you buy into your oppressor's strength. And here, I would suggest Gimple has not totally bought in. All right, I want to look at one more passage. Would someone else like to just jump in and read here where it says, when the pranksters?
Okay,
I'm happy to read.
Susan Farber, go ahead and read.
Okay.
When the pranksters and leg pullers found that I was easy to fool, every one of them tried his luck with me. Gimple, the Tsar is coming to Frankfurt. Gimple, the moon fell down in Turbin. Gimple, little Hodel fur piece found a treasure behind the bathhouse. And I, like a golem, believed everyone. In the first place, everything is possible, as it is written in the wisdom of the fathers. I've forgotten just how. Second, I had to believe when the whole town came down on me. If I ever dared to say, "Ah, you're kidding," there was trouble. People got angry. What do you mean? You want to call everyone a liar? What was I to do? I believed them, and I hope at least that did some good.
And I hope at least that did some good. So we have here the situation where Gimple is sort of, I don't want to say in on the joke, but he's a little bit above it all. And when you stay above it, you're all of a sudden, it doesn't become about your ego. You're able to say, okay, these are people, they're human, they have all sorts of frailties, they're not even that nice. But maybe with the way I behave, I can create something, at least keep the peace a bit. So I wanted to share with you a little bit of text before I move on to get a gist of the story and who Gimple is and what is he doing. He is not simply capitulating to this role, but indeed he's choosing it. So in literature, this is actually an established trope, and I'm going to go back to the greatest writer. Who's the greatest writer in English?
Shakespeare.
I'm going to go back to Shakespeare. And Shakespeare often relied on the character of the wise fool to reveal truths and alert characters to important realities. And he used this device, for example, in King Lear, where the fool is the only character in the play who can confront the monarch with difficult truth. Everyone else is banished, killed, right? I mean, King Lear certainly doesn't want to hear the truth from any of his daughters. But sometimes the wise fool is a character in a literary work who is able to either share truth with other characters or share them with the reader in a way that other characters can't. And I think we have some of that going on with Gimple. Gimple might also be compared to Cervantes' Don Quixote. And the literary critic Harold Bloom, he once said that Don Quixote, the story of this man who's chasing windmills, forever hopeful, Pollyanna, rose-tinted glasses. He says that Bloom says that Don Quixote represents the human need to withstand suffering. And Gimple is a character who demonstrates how suffering is so pervasive, it cannot always be alleviated, but it sometimes has to be managed. And the suspension of disbelief, a literary term, the suspension of disbelief sometimes can help us deal with circumstances that are just beyond our control and so difficult to deal with. So we have Gimple. He's sort of a literary trope. He's a human trope, and he's a biblical trope. He's almost like Eov. The more mistreatment and the more grief he has, the more he's sure that there's God, by the way, and that what happens in the world matters. And the story actually deals with the world to come. And it's a big theme with Isaac Bashevis Singer. Isaac Bashevis Singer completely left religion behind when he was 18 in every single way, even in sort of the most basic ways. But he was extremely interested in Jewish thinking, Jewish morality, and this leveling of the playing field in the world to come. And so Gimple also stands for that. Okay, I want to look at another passage now. So hands up if someone wants to show me a hand. Someone who'd just like to read a short passage. Hands up, help me so I can see you. Noreen Firestone.
Yeah, okay.
Do you like to just read this short passage here?
Sure. I went to the rabbi to get some advice. He said, "It is written, better to be a fool all your days than for 1 hour to be evil. You are not a fool, they are the fools. For he who causes his neighbor to feel shame loses paradise himself."
Okay. So, voice of reason. Voice of reason. We have the rabbinic voice come along and say, these people are, they're the fools, they're indecent, they're liars, and don't take any notice. And don't let them make you feel less. Now, Gimple does something very interesting. He doesn't become angry. He doesn't dismiss them. He doesn't seek revenge, certainly not at this point. But he takes in the rabbi's words and says, okay. He's able to take it in without despising the people around him. Now, if we think about Jewish models of harmony, it's quite exceptional. We might say, well, he's a fool, but he's not such a fool. So we have a lot of balls in the air when we're thinking about how Gimple is dealing with his predicament. So what does Judaism say about embarrassing someone, about shaming someone? Any thoughts? Anyone ever come across any teachings about what
It's
Judaism has to
character
say?
assassination.
Sorry?
It's character assassination.
Well, it's the Talmud says that to embarrass one is the equivalent of shedding blood. It's the equivalent of shedding blood. And it comes from, it's biblical in origin. We had Rabbi Diana talking about the biblical Torah Shebiktav and Torah Shebal Peh. So it's biblical and Talmudic, the two levels. We have it biblically coming from Sefer Vayikra and Talmudically coming from Baba Metzia. And then we have in the Gemara, we have Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak saying, anyone who publicly mortifies his companion is comparable to a shedder of blood. So very clear. It is like assassination. But here's the key point. Gimple really refuses to be embarrassed or ashamed. In fact, he's embarrassed for the townspeople. He's embarrassed for this kind of harlot of a wife he has. He sees these people are pathetic as they delight in their games and shenanigans. They don't really dupe him. And in turn, they're the ones who seem to be utterly foolish. So it's an interesting play on this idea of being embarrassed, this idea of shaming. And a lot, well, in psychology, sometimes you'll hear psychologists say, you can't be a victim if you don't sort of assume the mantle of victimhood. Now, nothing's true 100% of the time, right? I want to say that. But you might say that, maybe 60, 70% of the time, that works. That works. That sometimes you're in a situation and you can choose whether or not you're going to buy into how you're being victimized. And you might say, no, I'm not playing. I don't choose to be a victim. Okay, we have another passage here. Can I have another hand? This is a slightly longer passage if someone would like to read. Hands up.
I'm happy to read, Shanna.
Oh, thank you, Ellie. Okay, so here we go. This is Gimple confronting Elka, his wife, who has borne one child after another out of wedlock. Gimple has found her in bed with multiple men. She's really altogether a shameless woman. Please, Ellie.
Gimple said, why has your ship gone and sunk? What shall I say? I answered. A fine thing you've done to me. If my mother known of it, she'd have died a second time. She said, are you crazy or what? How can you make such a fool? I said, of one who should be the Lord and Master? What's the matter with you? She said. What have you taken into your head to imagine? I saw that I must speak bluntly, openly. Do you think this is the way you use an orphan? I said. You have borne a bastard. She answered, try this out of your head. This child is yours. How can he be mine? I argued. He was born 17 weeks after the wedding. She told me then that he was premature. I said, isn't he a little too premature? She said she had had a grandmother who carried just a short time, and she resembled this grandmother of hers as one drop of water does another. She swore to it with such oath that you would have believed a peasant at the fair if he had used them. To tell the plain truth, I believe her. But when I talked it over the next day with the school, he told me that the very same thing happened to Adam and Eve. 2 they went up to bed, and 4 they descended. There isn't a woman in the world who is not the granddaughter of Eve, he said. That was how it was. They argued me dumb. But who really knows how such things are?
Thank you. This is another important point in Isaac Bashevis Singer. Don't assume you always know everything. Even when things seem completely unreasonable, completely unbelievable, always you leave a bit of space for the exception, for the implausible. And I think that this is actually, if we think about the Rodef Shalom, and who are our models of Rodef Shalom? We have Aaron, right? Moshe's brother, a Rodef Shalom. Moshe himself considered Rodef Shalom. These are people who were willing to consider different possibilities. They were dealing with God. You're dealing with God. There are a lot of possibilities. And so, on the one hand, it's obvious this is not Gimple's child. On the other hand, maybe there are extenuating circumstances. And in the story, Gimple ends up being an exemplary father. And he ends up being very close to most of the children. And it's a great joy in his life. The children become a great joy in his life. So it's something to keep in mind. in terms of how the story plays out, right? You could say, well, this man is taken for a ride. Not only are these not his children, not only is his wife unfaithful to him, but he's having to support this brood. Well, here was Gimple. He was an orphan. He had no family. And now he has this brood. And he was a very successful baker, and he had a very successful business. And so he was able to support them, and they gave him great joy and comfort. So we have a story that's saying things aren't so simple. Let's keep an open mind. And then there's one other line here. You know what? I'm just going to read this line because it's very short, and I want you to. It's a classic line. It's an important line of the story. So if you see here, number 5, I resolved that I would always believe what I was told. What's the good of not believing? Today it's your wife you don't believe. Tomorrow it's God himself you won't take stock in. So a very kind of Jewish piece of wisdom. Belief in whatever manifestation you have it, and I don't want to simplify belief is a complicated issue, but whether or not your belief is in an optimistic world, belief in yourself, belief in putting one foot in front of the other, whatever belief it is that works for you, once you start to erode belief, it can be a slippery slope. And so that's Gimple's piece of wisdom. So what we have here is Singer sort of not just pleading for a kind of compassion in relationships, but I want to take one step back and just put on the side that when the story is read in allegory, what happens is Gimple becomes the model for the Jewish people living in a situation where they're always harassed, always mistreated. But this idea of don't lose hope in the Jewish people, don't lose hope in the future of the Jewish people, don't lose hope in God, and also don't play the victim. Know who you are, and in your heart of hearts, keep that strength. So Singer is giving us a story of Gimple in this town, but he's also giving us on the side, and this is just a little sidebar, of an allegory of the of Jewish people. And the story is often read that way, so I just wanted to bring that into focus. Gimple, in some ways, makes life easier by playing along. And of course, this has been a question in Jewish history. Do you simply play nicely and try to go along with the non-Jewish society around you and try not to make waves? Or do you become indignant and infuriated? Gimple, obviously, in his own life, chooses to go along. And again, he's not exactly duped, but he decides to allow the kind of the farce, the ruse to go along. So we come back to the question, is he the simple son of the Haggadah? Is Gimple simple? Is he that sort of limited intelligence? What do you think?
No, Why? Because he sees beyond what others see.
He is. He's got that clarity, right? He's got that clarity. He's got perspective, he's got clarity, and he's been told by the rabbis of the city, you're not a fool. Right? So he has other voices that are encouraging him and saying, no, you're not a fool. Okay, I'm just gonna mute myself for one moment.
It seems to me that the Gimple sees the end game. like he allows himself to be perceived as a fool because he understands that his alternatives are much more dangerous. It seems to me.
Well, they're dangerous, and he might have more to lose personally.
Right.
So he's sort of weighing his options.
Right.
Weighing his options. And there's a lot of value in harmony. And what's he going to really achieve with disharmony?
Right.
He's not going to
right.
change the people, and he's probably only going to bring himself grief. So he's really kind of, if you look at interpersonal relations on a communal level, on a personal level, he's sort of like a graph in front of him, and he's really reading it with a lot of sophistication.
I just
I think, oh, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. Go ahead.
I think he was much smarter than the community and the people thought. And choice entered in, and he chose his path. He chose how he was going to fit in the world, and he was happy. He raised children. He was a good father.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, he was actually quite a distinguished member of the community.
Because he refused to play the victim.
He refused to play the victim.
So he was a strong person. I'm just curious about Singer himself. What do we know? What made him turn against religion or give up religion?
Interesting question. So I'll go to a sidebar of 3 minutes on Isaac Bashevis Singer. Isaac Bashevis Singer came from a rabbinic family. He grew up both outside Warsaw and in Warsaw itself. His father was a rabbi, a Hasidic rabbi, and he had an older brother and an older sister. His sister was sort of neglected by the family. The family was not that interested in having a daughter, but his older brother was this great prodigy, the great joy of the family. And at age 18, the brother traumatized the family by telling them that he was no longer going to live a traditional Jewish life. He was going to become a writer and a journalist and a free thinker. And he went off to join.
Well, I was going to say noon, but it's past noon already. No.
And so he went off to join the Yiddish writers circles, and he became Israel Joshua Singer went on quite early to become a very well-known, very successful Yiddish writer, and ended up by the mid-1930s moving to the United States. Isaac Bashevis Singer, who was 10 years younger, really followed in his brother's footsteps. He was inspired by his brother, and likewise by 1819 had left the yeshiva, wasn't sure how he was going to support himself. He did what many former yeshiva students did, went on to tutor and give lessons in Hebrew and Yiddish, and started writing journalism, and eventually made his way to the United States as well. And both brothers were part of what today, it's interesting. Isaac Bashevis Singer became a vegetarian, so kashrut wasn't such an issue, but certainly was not traditional, was not ritually traditional, did not go to synagogue. But in his own life, I mean, he was so Jewish in terms of who he socialized with, in his Yiddish culture, his Yiddish writing, his mindset. His world was very, very, very Jewish. His younger brother actually stayed religious, became a rabbi. His father died of natural causes in the late 30s, early 40s, but his mother and youngest brother, unfortunately, were killed in the Holocaust. His older sister went on to live in England. She had a very unhappy life. Also, she did not stay traditional. And, it's almost like I just read this terrific article about this myth we have that all the Eastern European Jews were all like Tevye and they were all singing tradition and they got to the United States and then it all fell apart. That wasn't really the case. There was already a very strong stream of younger generations leaving traditional Judaism. And the Singer brothers were very much part of that. Cultural Judaism, which was Yiddish culture, was sort of a replacement religion for many of them. And that's really the direction that the Singer brothers went in. So that was sort of a bit of a long answer to a short question. Was that adequate, Ilana? Does that give you a...
Yes, thank you. That was very interesting. I had no
Yeah.
idea.
Singer in his writing, if you read In My Father's Court, his memoir of growing up in his father's court, it starts off with this very interesting sort of admission how the best ethical system in the world is the Beit Din, and how the rabbinic court is the truest, purest, most pure form of justice in the world, and that one day, ideally, the Messiah will come, and the rabbinic court justice will be the only justice it will know, and the world will be in a much better place. So he was an interesting fellow, Isaac Bashevis Singer. He had
But
a
I'm
lot of
curious,
ideas.
did he adopt Reform Judaism or nothing?
He actually, his sympathies remained, I would say, not only Orthodox, but quite ultra-Orthodox. His sympathies, not his lifestyle, his living, his own personal choices, but his sympathies remained quite ultra-Orthodox. And when I say ultra-Orthodox, I mean, the Hasidic yeshiva world of between the two world wars in Europe.
I'd like to say something just a little bit more about the world before the Shoah in Eastern Europe. I not that long ago read Singer's novels, The Manor and the Estate, in which he really describes that world, as I guess he did in a lot of his works, but particularly in the second volume. It not only was there a division between people who maintained a traditional way of life and those who just broke with it, but there was a big variety, including there were some Zionists and they all argued with each other, and there were socialists, and it was just a huge variety of attitudes and thoughts about being Jewish, ways to be Jewish, just total spectrum there that he
There was
beautifully.
thank you for sharing that. There was an enormous spectrum, and I think that sort of gets lost in the noise of today's worries about Jewish life. Yes, Susan, you want to say?
I have a question in a sense. Maybe because in my studies and my teaching of literature at the high school, junior high level, I tend to love to put when something is written and what's going on in the world around as an influence in what happens. So you mentioned to us that Singer, yes, he's come to New York at an earlier time frame and reestablishes himself there. But this is first written in 1945 at the tail end of the Holocaust, tail end of the war. And having been in New York, he's kind of protected from all the horror, the tragedy of the war and displacement of people. And so in this book, in this story that you shared with us, you talk about having compassion, which is important, and that if you lose your belief, there's a slippery slope. This is some of the words I wrote down, and not to play a victim, and that you have a choice. You can create harmony, or you could go on with everybody else's program and live by their what they call out to you, what they propose to you. And if you put this in light of what happens to the Jews in 40, 45, maybe even earlier, starting in 30 something, it's kind of an interesting message for him to emphasize in light of everything that's gone on in the experience of others and other communities.
Right. So it's hard to account for all the choices Isaac Bashevis Singer made. Some of his choices were early on, in the early years after the Holocaust, to sort of skirt the Holocaust a bit. So that's one of the choices. One of the other things I mentioned is that I've mentioned several times, as you noted, choosing to be a victim. And I said, sometimes it's not a choice. So I said that, 60, 70% of the time, 73% of the time, maybe you have a choice. There are times when you don't have a choice. Obviously, with the Holocaust, you didn't have a choice. And in interpersonal relationships, you don't always have a choice. I would say maybe the majority of time there's choice, but there are times when you don't. And so I want to leave that escape hatch in my explanation. And in terms of how Singer decides at this point to write the story that people then turn into an allegory of the Jewish people sort of having this escape hatch of victimization, I didn't want to take that tack so much now, so I'm not going to develop it very much, but it's definitely a thorny way to look at the story. Remember, the story doesn't really get looked at in English until 1953, and Yiddish readers and English readers had different reactions to things. By 53, readers were not necessarily quite as reactive as they would have been in 45. That's not a very satisfying answer, but I'm going to leave it there at that for now. Okay, I want to go on to another passage from the story because I feel that looking at the story itself is important. Could someone raise a hand, someone who hasn't read for a relatively short passage? Hands up, anyone keen? Marion, you'll read for me? Hold on.
Sure.
I'm just putting up the text. Okay. Okay. Here's to make a long story short.
To make a long story short, I lived 20 years with my wife. She bore me 6 children, 4 daughters and 2 sons. All kinds of things happened, but I neither saw nor heard. I believed, and that's all. The rabbi recently said to me, "Belief in itself is beneficial. It is written that a good man lives by his faith."
Interesting. Belief, again, I want to emphasize, belief is a tricky business, but for those who find belief to be comfort, it can be a great comfort and a great strength. And Bashevis Singer, he came from a world where he saw people who gained a lot of strength from belief. It was definitely the case with his father. It was definitely the case with many of the people in the world he grew up in. And so he had seen how belief can be this sort of elixir in terms of making people survive, endure all kinds of life challenges that otherwise would be either impossible or extremely challenging.
I have a question.
Yes.
The fool goes a few times in your talks to the rabbis, and the rabbis always explain to him that he is not a fool, he's good for his beliefs. I wonder why the town's rabbis didn't get after the people.
That's an interesting question. It's an interesting question because in the story, it's even one of the rabbi's daughters who's part of this throng of harassing crowds. It's a good expression. Isaac Bashevis Singer tends to let rabbis off the hook. And I think that this idea of the Rodef Shalom, the rabbis are a bit in that category off also, where they don't necessarily want to create too many waves. There are enough waves out there, sort of quiet pieces of wisdom issued at key moments seem to be the way to go, according to kind of the wisdom of the story. But it's a good question. And I'm going to just give a teaser. I'm going to be giving a course at Schechter on Zoom for any of you want to join starting next week. It's called Yiddish Rebels with a Cause. And one of the writers we'll be looking at is the Isaac Bashevis singer Nemesis, Chaim Grada. And he is going to, we're going to look at a test where he's going to write a lot about what rabbis do and don't do. So at the end of this lesson, I'll put up a little bit of information about that. But Grada and Singer are great foils to see what writers do with expectations of rabbis. Okay, I want to go on. Now we have the Satan is going to come visit. The evil Satan. I need a satanic voice to read this passage. Anyone want to jump in and give me a good Satan?
Let me see if I can help you out.
Okay, here comes the passage. Please, where it says one night.
One night, when the period of mourning was done, as I lay dreaming on the flower sacks, 12...
Oh, sorry, that's a mistake. There came.
There came the spirit of evil himself and said to me, Gimple, why do you sleep? I said, what should I be doing? Eating kreplach. The whole world deceives you, he said, and you ought to deceive the world in your turn. How can I deceive all of the world? I asked him. He answered, you might accumulate a bucket of urine every night, and at night pour it onto the dough. Let the sages of Rampo eat filth. What about the judgment in the world to come? I said. There is no world to come, he said. They are sold you a bill of goods and talked you into believing you carried a cat in your belly. What nonsense! Well then, I said, is there a God? He answered, there is no God either. What? I said, is there then? I think Meyer.
Thank you. Thank you. So here's the voice of the Satan. And if you're going to give in, and if you're going to abandon faith and belief, who is waiting to embrace you? The Satan. And that's never good. And so, just coming back to our theme of harmony, reconciliation, compassion. Once you turn on your brethren, no matter how petty and nasty they are, you become ripe for dealings with the Satan. And that is going to take you down a very pernicious road. So that is now those are Gimpel's options. That's sort of how the two polarities have been played out for him. So now he's got this choice. What's he going to do? Because he understands. He understands that Elka was not faithful. He understands that the town in many ways was cruel to him. He understands that he has been the object of all kinds of deception. And what's he going to do? And the Satan is saying, listen, stand up for yourself. Give these people what they deserve. And then dreams are very big in Yiddish literature, and they're big in the story. Gimpel has a dream. Who wants to be Elka? We're going to have that deceptive Elka come along. Any willing Elkas out there? No?
I can read.
Okay, terrific. Go ahead.
I saw in a dream at once Elka in her shroud. She called to me, what have you done, Gimple? I said to her, It's all your fault. He started to cry. You fool, she said. You fool. Because I was false, is everything false too? I never deceived anyone but myself. I'm paying for it all, Gimple. They spare you nothing here. I looked at her face. It was black. I was startled and waked and remained sitting dumb. I sensed that everything hung in the balance. A false step now, and I'd lose eternal life. But God gave me his help. I seized the long shovel and took out the loaves, carried them into the yard, and started to dig a hole in the frozen earth.
Okay, so Gimple almost crossed the line to do the devil's work. He's visited by Elka, and she says, it was foolhardy. I thought I was so clever. I thought I was enjoying myself. I thought I was having fun, and I'm paying the price, and it was all for nothing. It was all pitiful. And Gimple avoids falling and crossing over to the dark side. So we know in the story that Elka, when all is said and done, the town it's sort of it's pitiful. It's pitiful. All of the shit is pitiful, and Gimple has stood the test of time. Stayed with it. All right, I just want to show